Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from. My name is Christine Davis. I'm an associate at the Carbon Trust working with a variety of clients in the manufacturing sector and primarily in the pharma and chemical sector as well, to essentially support our clients in their decarbonisation journey. And I've got the pleasure to be introducing you today to our manufacturing stage, where with some support from our guest panelists, we'll be diving into how you can get started on Scope 3 footprinting and decarbonisation, and also how to navigate the complexities of your value chains in order to progress through to net zero. So I'll start by taking you through a bit of a background before we jump into the panel, which will be around 30 minutes with some time for questions at the end from the audience. Great. As we've heard from Benj, Tillman and Danielle in the plenary, the business response to climate emergency has two related imperatives, right, which are widely recognized in key regulations and guidance, such as the CSRD and TBT. So put simply, businesses must work to reduce their own emissions and impact on climate, but they should also be making appropriate preparations of the various impacts of global heating that are already baked into the climate. So with this in mind, and recognizing the need to act, we're already seeing radical change across all manufacturing sectors. And this may come from some businesses driving the change across their own sectors and others simply reacting to it. So I'd like to share some examples from a couple of sectors where we can see organizations driving or reacting to change. For example, the one on the left, following COP26, the CEOs from 7 major pharma companies announced a joint action to achieve near-term emission reduction targets and also accelerate the delivery of net zero health systems. So we see this as an example of the global health sector actively coming together to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this was done through the Sustainable Markets Initiative Health Systems Task Force. So since their formation, the task force has recently signed an open letter. And the open letter essentially calls on their suppliers to commit to joint minimum climate and sustainability targets, and essentially ask them to play their part and incentivize decarbonisation efforts across these complex supply chains. So a great example there of active action in the industry. The example in the middle, so this is a study released recently by Cornell's University, Global Labour Institute and Schroders. And the study revealed that extreme heat and flooding are already threatening key apparel production hubs and will also continue to do so at an incremental rate. So they examined 6 different brands and looked at company level climate risk, costs and financing for adaptation, and to simply remain resilient. And they found that these manufacturers could face a 22% shortfall in export earnings and miss out on $65 billion in revenue by 2030. As you can imagine, these projections rise significantly for 2050, and the study found that it could amount to a potential 65 to 70% shortfall in export earnings. So this study outlines the business case for the fashion sector to focus on climate adaptation and mitigation to reduce these risks, both in the near term and the long term. And the last example, as we know, the natural resource security is threatened globally by extreme weather, which is obviously key to a lot of sectors for the supply of their raw ingredients. This includes pharma, apparel, beauty, etc. And we can see an example of climate adaptation from DEFRA in the UK, who have set out a 6-year investment plan. So they've allocated £5.2 billion between 2021 and 2027 to protect against flooding and coastal erosion. And the programme essentially aims to develop new defence schemes that better protect around 336,000 properties by 2027. So we've seen some examples of organisations taking action to adapt or prepare for the climate's impact. whether it's through actively engaging with their suppliers, to analyzing an industry's risks and opportunities, or even actively investing in preparing for the effects of the climate. But at the Carbon Trust, we see the most thoughtful businesses have already developed an understanding of their carbon footprint, and also through TCFD compliance have begun to think about their climate risks and opportunities as well, essentially to develop a mitigation strategy. But of course, developing a transition plan is an iterative process and should be seen as this continual loop between these four key stages. So at Analysys, we're trying to gain insight into our own emissions, our risks and opportunities, etc. And the implications of this analysis then plays out in strategy, which informs the action to support internal change, access financing to help fund those changes, and also partner to enable change in the wider value chain as well. This then drives the impact, which of course should be accurately measured and disclosed as well. And then closing the loop, this analysis from the impact is used to inform a refinement of the strategy. One thing we are seeing across our own client base is the evolution of climate response from a thing that the sustainability team have to think about with input from their marketing and compliance teams to something that their entire business needs to grapple with to remain relevant in a net zero world. Hence, rather than transition planning, we might talk about transformation planning within a business. With that being said, I'd like to put forward a poll to understand essentially which of these stages is most important to you and your business in the year ahead. Will it be analysis, strategy, action, or impact? And that poll should be coming up on your screens right now. And I'll hold for 10 to 15 seconds for you to submit your answers. Great, I can see some votes are coming through. So analysis at the moment looks to be at around 50%, with action at 38% and impact on 13%, but 0% on strategy from what I can see so far. Really interesting insights, and I'm sure the discussion that we'll hear now from our panel will support in advancing towards this each stage in the transition plan. I will now hand over to Anna, so we'll get into the panel discussion. I'll be handing you over to Anna Raffaelli. She's the Carbon Trust DACH Regional Manager, and she'll be moderating the panel today and introducing you to our speakers. And they'll be discussing how to get started on Scope 3 footprinting and decarbonisation, and also supporting you or sharing insights and tips on how to navigate the complexities of your own value chain. Over to you, Anna.
Hi, thank you, Christine. Hello, everyone. I'm very pleased to moderate this session today. I'm also part of the smaller percentage joining from somewhere else around Europe. I'm at the moment joining from Berlin, where the Carbon Trust recently opened an office. So I am, as Christine said, the regional manager for DACH, so Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and also I am leading our activities in the sector of apparel, footwear, and clothing. The session of today, it's as Christine was mentioning, and as also we heard in a different introduction about Scope 3, so getting started on Scope 3 footprinting and decarbonization. And the title that we chose, it's mentioning the biggest point there, so navigating the complexity of the value chain. That's why considering the manufacturing sector, the value chain are almost very complex, and all the challenges related to that are really very difficult to navigate. Before starting with the introduction of our amazing guest panelist and the panel itself, I would like just to remind you that you can send questions during our panel. You can just use the form, the Q&A section that you can find on your screen. You can type your question, and please, if you want to address the question specifically to one of our panelists, just type it in the question and specifying for whom it's your question. And then in the last 10 minutes, we will try to go through as many questions as possible. And so getting started with the panel. So today we have the pleasure of having here some of the panelists that of today's session. And then it's Richard Anderson, Performance and Reporting Lead of GSK, Jose Argedashwang, Head of Corporate Responsibility and Sustainability at River Island, and Lerke Christensen, Sustainability and ESG Manager at Leo Pharma. Our CEO, Chris Stark, mentioned today the importance of having champions in the challenging journey that we all have in front of us when it comes to the sustainability challenges. So asking our guests to quickly introduce themselves, I would also like to ask you what made you choose this career, and why, you decided that your path, your road was the one to be devoting your career to be really a sustainability champion. So we can start with Lerke, to you.
Yes, thank you, Anna, for having me. As you said, I'm a Sustainability and ESG Manager in Leo Pharma. I've been with Leo for 3 years and have a background in retail prior to that. Why did I choose this? I don't know. I thought it was super interesting. And to me, I think if we are to solve some of the greatest challenges that we have in society, the private sector needs to lead on that. I'm not particularly activistic in my approach. I think money talks. Everything we do needs to have a good business case behind it. So it's more of a follow what you think is exciting, right? And suddenly you end up here. So.
Thank you, Lerke. And Jose, what about you?
Well, again, the same. Thank you for having me. And I am heading the sustainability and ESG work at River Island. And I've been in sustainability for over 25 years. So I don't know if I chose sustainability or sustainability chose me. When I started, it wasn't a thing. It was something that was being discovered by businesses. At the beginning, it was mostly a risk management exercise. And I think I've been fortunate enough to evolve along with the movement within corporate world as to becoming what it is today, which I think is something that features more heavily in the boardroom. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jose. And then coming to our third panelist, Richard.
Yeah, hi. Thank you again for having me at the panel. So how did I get into sustainability? Again, probably like Jose, a little bit by accident. That I joined GSK 19 years ago for an opportunity to work with a team trying to promote green chemistry with the drug development process. So GSK already had people who were doing sustainability, but it wasn't called sustainability then. And it was really interesting, exciting work. It evolved into sustainability about 15 years ago when we started bringing in carbon footprinting. And that's how I got into carbon footprinting, because I was asked to do some carbon footprinting. And from there, my career has evolved. And what's really fascinating is we get to see everything across the corporation from a sort of top-down perspective. And you appreciate how complex organizations are, but we get to see kind of a strategic view and have some influence on that, especially now sustainability is top of everyone's agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, and thank you to the three of you for your questions, to your answers that are really inspiring, especially also considering what Christine said also in her introduction, that definitely sustainability is no longer something that it's just for the sustainability office, but it's really, as you just mentioned, Richard, across the whole organization, across the strategy. So just starting with the first question of our panel, I would like to ask you if you can briefly describe your company's industry level of complexity, because we said, okay, that the one of the biggest challenges here for Scope 3 footprinting in the manufacturing sector, it's really related to the complexity of the value chain. So if you can just guide us through very quickly about the challenges of the value chain, the industry, and the main challenges you encountered when calculating Scope 3. Maybe Richard, you want to start?
So I work for a global pharmaceutical company, and our supply chains are incredibly complex. We have a mix of there's many tiers of supplier levels who supply to us to build the complex active pharmaceutical ingredients that go into the medicines and vaccines that we distribute and provide to the world. So they're really complex. Where did we start with that? I think we started a long time ago doing this because we had people who were quite foresighted on sustainability, and to start navigating that complexity was understanding where the money is spent. That's the first place to start, I think, where your money is being spent, and if you can start using or working out emissions from a spend perspective, that's a great place to start. And then once you can do that, you understand where the potential hotspots lie. And there you can dig deeper and try and work to get different types of data. But with a complex supply chain, it's very difficult to get information from suppliers because some know what you're talking about and many don't. So you've got to navigate the levels of understanding and the language you're talking about to the different suppliers who you're engaging with. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Richard. So you mentioned many tiers and dealing with different people to talk with and transferring this idea of complexity. Lerke, what about you? Are you finding similar issues, different ones? What's your view on that?
Yes, so Richard and I share the same industry, so I can only echo that. It's an extremely complex industry. It's highly regulated. We focus on innovation, manufacturing, supplying. Going into the API production, so active pharmaceutical production, is a whole session in itself when we talk about emissions and Scope 3. And then we have contract manufacturing organizations, right? We have contract research organizations. And everything, when you do carbon accounting, it all is all surrounded around tracking and managing data. How good of this do they have it? As Richard says, some people don't know what we're talking about when we reach out. So it's really all about having accurate or consistent data. And then coordinating between a lot of different entities with different priorities and transparency. When we started, Leo Pharma calculated its first Scope 3 back in 2019. It was quite a big task, but a lot of the challenges we haven't realized until later on, because that's when you realize how complete is your carbon accounting, or how consistent is it. None of the people employed in 19 works in the company anymore. So documentation and transparent methodologies is key in order for the rest of us to continue with that Scope 3 inventory. So the more you work with Scope 3, the more you realize how little you actually know about it, which is the constant challenge, because everyone is looking for that one number. In Scope 3 is everything but one number. So,
Thank you, Lerke. That's a very interesting perspective. That, of course, a lot of people always wait for a simple answer, and then it's much, much more complex, and you can't just come down to one data, one number. And if we move to the apparel and clothing industry, Jose, what can you say about that, about the level of complexity and the challenges in calculating Scope 3 that you at River Island encountered?
I don't think that is similar. I think that our supply chain is also equally complex, full of tiers, and visibility is one of the biggest challenges. So one of the things, for example, Larson was saying is about getting that visibility throughout, understanding where the challenges are. We've been working on getting visibility into our supply chain for a few years now, and then is really then trying to identify what Richard was saying about the hotspots. So where are your hotspots? How are you going to address that? And then prioritizing. You have so many different factors that come into play in your Scope 3 that you can't pretend to address them all at one time. I think that you need to prioritize. You need to know exactly where the biggest impact is going to be, and then I think the other element that sometimes is overlooked is really understanding your product. So you really need to know your product well, and question yourself whether there is something you can do from the start to kind of rethink your product, and whether that's the first kind of action that you need to look at when starting to kind of put your parameters and your targets and your goals into where you want to go. So just kind of summarize is knowing your product, and get visibility to your supply chain, and then consistency in data. I think that's measurement and having a clear framework that you're going to use that allows you to track data consistently and then prioritize. I think that's definitely a way to go, but it's definitely not easy, and I think there's many different challenges that surround when it comes to Scope 3, especially because the majority of it is not on your control. So when we talk about Scope 1 and 2, we can have direct decision making power over some certain actions. We can choose which energy to procure. We can choose which vehicles to have in our fleet. We can make those decisions. But when it comes to Scope 3, you definitely need to then also have a look at your partners and who your suppliers are, and what are the best ways to bringing them on the journey. And it will require in many cases collaboration industry-wide, in sense of getting together with your competitors and looking at how you can influence the common supply chain that we all have, and address the challenges that they are facing as well.
Thank you, Jose. So now after this first round, we just underlined and heard from you which are the main challenges and why this sector can be considered so complex when we talk about the supply chain, because we mentioned a plurality of tiers, and then coordination, visibility, collaboration across the sector, setting and targeting the priorities. And after this overview of what the challenges are, if we want to think about how to tame this complexity when it comes to scope and boundaries, to data collection, to methodologies, how would you say that you tackled the challenge of managing this? What was your key success element or the strategy that helped you overcoming this complexity? Maybe Jose, you can go on.
Oh well, it's again, it's a complex it's a complex issue to kind of look at your Scope 3 and trying to put everything in just one bucket. I think that's one of the things that I would say as well is really looking at where the challenges lie in terms of whether your suppliers have access to the infrastructure that you need, or whether there's the correct data that you're going to track. We've been facing issues where because of lack of data, for example, in Scope 3, we need to do a lot of assumptions, and these assumptions sometimes are not quite accurate and lead to then miscalculation, or not really having a clear picture what your actual measurements or your Scope 3 is, and your impact is. And then so it is really understanding how are you going to mine that data, how you're going to get the indicators that you need to, how reliable these are. And it's a thing that I think affects every business in the same way, where everything is evolving at the same time. So we do are getting better in terms of tracking data. We're getting better in terms of addressing those complexities in Scope 3. But in order to set those clear, specific targets, you need to start by making sure that you're measuring the right things in the right way.
Thank you, Jose. So let's say the key learnings from your side was learn how to deal with data and be sure that you look at the right ones. And Lerke, if we move to you, what can you identify as the let's say the key success factor to make a shift and move forward?
I think Jose mentioned it earlier. You need to look into where the most material topics or areas in your Scope 3 are. So you have to set the scope and the boundaries, make some really clear boundaries. And maybe I actually also think we need to give ourselves a little bit of a slack in terms of, we really want to continuously improve the data, right? We want to have more and more accuracy, but we also need to prioritize, because we can't do it all. There is a million different categories in Scope 3. And we could, if we had the time and the resources, we could do work from now on and forever, but we have to prioritize. And you have to look into saying, okay, so where are the big chunks? This is where we focus, both in terms of reducing our emissions, but also in terms of improving the accuracy, improving the data collection, moving from estimates to more accurate data, constantly balancing that. Now, how comprehensive is it? How practical is it? Do we want to use industry averages or estimates? Are we okay with using spend-based data for some of our categories? Because in reality, what we do is we want to measure the change from year to year. I'm not interested in comparing our emissions to Richard's emissions or someone else's emissions. I'm interested in measuring the emissions within Leo Pharma and our progress, because the complexity just shows that unless you have that really defined scope and the methodology, we can come up with 10 different results. So being a little bit controlled in terms of repeating what you have done, and then whenever you have some updates, right, balancing, do I want to go back and look at my rebaseline? How big of a change is this adjustment? And then, of course, when you prioritize, you also say, okay, if we introduce supplier scorecards, for example, can we do it in a process that's already established? Because when you measure Scope 3, you also put a lot of extra tasks and work on your colleagues. So we need to integrate that to make it as smooth as possible, because Scope 3 can be a monster if we want it to be. And we don't want to scare people away. So
definitely. So Richard, so far we had look at the right stage of data, set priorities, be clear in communication, not to, let's say, scare people away, but get them involved in the process. Any other success factors that you would mention from your perspective in taming the complexity of the value chain?
Yeah, so building on what everyone said already, you've also got to be comfortable with uncertainty, that it's not perfect. You've got to be comfortable with that. So Jose mentioned doing collaborations. Scope 3 for our sector has led to some collaborations where we set up a program called Energize to enable our suppliers to access renewable energy. So it was an education program that we funded as sectors to educate people on what the different types of renewable electricity are out there, renewable energy are out there. So you can do what we call no regret actions to start doing something while the data is being sorted out. But equally, when we've got lots of data, we have prioritized, to Lurker's point, our top suppliers who have larger contributions, the middle set of suppliers who have some contributions, and kind of everyone else. I mean, to put that into context, and it's probably similar for Jose, we have 20,000-30,000 suppliers. So you cannot tackle everybody in once. So we have a very highly focused engagement with deep engagement with a pretty small number of suppliers, a program we call 30 for 30. And then there's a program we call Foundations, which covers the next tranche of suppliers where there is less engagement, but still engagement. And that's really important to do the prioritizing. In terms of the data itself, you will be getting better data over time as you can move to what we call, and certainly we work with the Carbon Trust, hybrid models for Scope 3, where you're moving from spend data to using as much activity-based data as possible. And I say you have to be comfortable with that there might be changes to your data compared to historical. And we've set rules around whether or not we would re-look at the baseline or not, and we have to follow the guidance from Science-Based Targets about when you have to look at restating data. But if you're comfortable with a bit of uncertainty, you can carry on moving on with the actions that make a difference, because in the end that will all work out.
Thank you, Richard. That's also very inspiring. We also heard this concept of the urge to act, the urge to do something, to start doing something, also in the plenary section and from some of the other speakers. So I guess that's really one of the key learning that we can bring with us. Okay, let's say that now we have identified that we talked about the complexity, which are the main factors for the complexity, how you in your companies manage to, let's say, tame this complexity and move forward. Now, let's say, moving on and saying, okay, we calculated the Scope 3 and what are the next steps? What comes next in terms of, like decarbonization strategy, risk mitigation, identifying the best opportunities, so how to use those data to foster progress. Richard, you have a long story in this, and you have been working on this for many years. And you set your net zero target 2 years ago, and your key concept is really like the one of start doing and turning ambition into reality and data into action. So, what would you do with those data to foster progress for your company?
So I think, again, because we have we're a big company, we have a procurement function. And sorry, if I take a step back, if you look at our Scope 3 footprint, 90% of our value chain footprint is Scope 3 emissions. So that's really important to get your senior leadership to understand that, because the bit we're all really comfortable dealing with is our Scope 1 and 2 and your internal energy programs and your the transition to electric vehicles for your sales teams and all that stuff. That's very important for your internal engagement, but you do have to build a team to address, in one sense, the elephant in the room, which is all the Scope 3, which is the larger contribution to our value chain footprint. So building capability of the procurement teams is really important, so they can have the conversations with their suppliers who they're managing the relationships with. And you can, I think, to Lurker's point, we're in a very regulated industry, so we can't just ask a supplier to change something. It's a very slow and complex challenge to change the way a product or that is supplied to us is manufactured. But there are things suppliers can do. So if you can focus on energy in your supply chain, that's a real good start point, because changing energy doesn't necessarily change the energy type, doesn't necessarily change how the product is manufactured in terms of the regulatory process. And every material is ultimately made of energy, right from you come back from how it came from the ground, be it in oil or some agricultural material, it's transformed using energy. So there's a lot of energy throughout the supply chains that can be addressed. But giving your procurement teams something to talk about, is there a playbook you can give them about how to engage? If it's the deep engagement on our 30 for 30 program, there's a specialist team who are tending to lead those engagements, who've got great capability. But for the next level down, it's, can you develop a kind of playbook of the kind of conversations, the kind of questions to ask? So there's things that can be done.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. That's a very interesting perspective. And if we move to Leo Pharma, the situation there, if I remember correctly from what we spoke, Lerke, it's quite different, because you didn't set a net zero target yet, but you worked rather on short-term targets. From this perspective, what can you add to this topic of what's the best next step and the best use that you can do of data to foster progress and to move on?
That's right. We haven't made a net zero commitment yet. We have a near-term climate target of reducing more than 50% of our own emissions, and an engagement target for our scope 3. Because then we come back to what has previously been mentioned. We're so comfortable with scope 1 and 2 because that's what we can control. And as Richard says, making not only the procurement department but also the senior management feel comfortable in that uncertainty of we can't really control that much. And then so of course, and we're looking into setting net zero targets in the future, and how are we going to include the organization, because I think some of the learnings we've had when we set the near-term target back in 2022 was that it's all about having the entire organization and the procurement organization committed to what we are doing, and they need to be able to see that they can actually make a difference. And as Richard said, you can focus on energy. We've had a big focus on our transportation and logistics in scope 3 because it's so tangible, and it's also one of the cases where there's a very clear link between CO2 and the business case. You can save a lot of money if you look at how to reduce your CO2 in your logistics and transportation. So taking those, then again back to the most material areas, right? Where can we make a difference? And then for us right now, it's a learning journey. We want to educate our colleagues. We want to make sure that we do it in a pragmatic approach, so that we are okay with not knowing how to get there, but that we at least have some kind of plan on how to approach it.
Thank you, Lerke. And if we consider that what you were saying at the beginning, Jose, the fact that one of the key challenges, but also one of the main goals, is also to know your product better. And considering the landscape of the apparel and clothing industry, there's a lot of focus on feasibility and to find probably where the opportunities to take action are in terms of talking about the products that you deal with, probably thinking about the materials, thinking about product life cycle. So what are the next step that you look at when with the data that you have been able to gather in order to improve your performance when it comes to sustainability of the company and the products?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And we did partner with the Carbon Trust to do a feasibility study once we had measured our scope 3 and looking at different scenarios, from where the low-hanging fruit is to where the stretches long term is, and trying to then again look at what Richard was highlighting in terms of those hot spots. We look at where the opportunities are, and then what's the rhythm of implementing specific actions, and where we're gonna go with that. So we have a model that allows us to then kind of play a little bit in terms of the pace of the business. In some areas, we can act a bit quicker. In some areas, we need to kind of understand that the business won't be able to react that quickly because there are external factors that don't allow us to do that. So it's also a useful tool for engaging that conversation with whether it's the C-suite or the board, in terms of really making sure that the decisions that we make are supported with the information that is allowing them to make informed, intelligent decisions. In some cases, it requires rethinking about where you source your products from. It requires a way of rethinking how you move and transport those goods. How do you get them to market? And also in terms of the life cycle. So applying more circular principles when you come to design, manufacturing, looking at all these different elements, and again, understanding how you're going to prioritize those specific actions that drive reductions in your supply chain. But definitely doing the feasibility study helps a lot, because it helps us really understand, okay, if we go all in, how long it's going to take, and where is going to be impacting us the biggest or the strongest. But if we kind of adjust the pace, we know exactly where we need to kind of put our energy and our efforts, makes it a bit more efficient.
Thank you, Jose. Now, there is my last question for you, because before moving then to the Q&A sessions, and it's about communication and improvement. So, of course, a crucial part of this journey, it's related to what we communicate externally and how we communicate, especially these limitations and challenges to different stakeholders. You all mentioned that it's difficult to transfer this complexity and to engage with everyone in a way that you really have them on board, considering stakeholders, considering suppliers, without scaring them away. So if we would consider like the challenges coming to communication, Lerke, what could you say that it's the main challenges for you and Leo Pharma to this point?
It's super difficult, and as someone that works with it every day, my biggest challenge is speaking a language that people that don't work with it every day understand. It is so easy to get caught up in abbreviations and technicalities. So we rely heavily on our comms colleagues to sort of pressure test when are we being detailed for the sake of details, and when, because it's all about who you communicate to, right? So it's not about me when we communicate, it's about getting the message across that this is how it looks like. Is it a decrease? Have we seen an increase? Where are our biggest risks? So it's and then in terms of reporting, we report as we do with our financials. If you do make any changes, then you of course put it in your report. We have an ESG linked loan facility, so luckily most of our CO2 accounting has been assured, which is always nice, because it gives you a comfort, and it gives other people a comfort that it's what you communicate is true. But it's all about transparency, and then sometimes maybe leaving a little bit of your professional pride to sort of make a clear statement instead, and make sure that they understand the key message instead of understanding the details.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Like that, making sure that the bigger picture is also clear to everyone. Because I mean, details, of course, can be scary sometimes. That can seem too much. So everyone on board, it's definitely important. And Jose, you come from an industry that is communicating a lot, and of course, that can help in getting data, and understanding suppliers' challenges, but can also be challenging for the very same reason. What's your point on that?
Well, there's two things that I'll say about that. Is one is our internal communication and communication with our suppliers. It's something that I think we're more and more trying to be more specific and provide a little more support in terms of bringing suppliers along the journey, and also internally explaining some of these concepts and how it relates to everyone at River Island, for example. So it's hard to see sometimes how what I'm doing has an impact on this big work that we're doing around reducing emissions. So it's kind of bringing it to a place where people can relate and can really understand how their involvement is important. And the same with our suppliers. And this is similar to what was said before. I think Richard said that they're working with some of their top suppliers first. And so we've also kind of dissected our supply chain in a similar way. So trying to kind of look at our key strategic partners and how we look at volumes and what that impact is, and then bring that communication to them and keep them informed. And again, more and more, because our industry has also been working on this for some time. Many of the first tier suppliers, they're quite informed and aware about carbon emissions and impact and all this. Is when you go down the tiers, then you kind of have then a bit more of a challenge, specifically when you don't have those direct relationships with those suppliers and you really don't have access to. We've been working on a system for some time, like I was saying, where we're trying to get access, at least visibility into who those suppliers are, and then start engaging them in some form of communication, sharing some of our plans and ideas. So we have that kind of initial contact with them, but the focus at the moment is with those higher, kind of first tiers where we have that direct communication. And then the other piece of when you're communicating this is how you communicate it to your customer and how you communicate it to the market. And I think that that's where we also need to be careful, because we need to make sure that we're providing an accurate picture of what we're doing. We see sometimes that cases where information on reductions or information on achievements are a bit overly portrayed, and that has led here in the UK, for example, that the Consumer Markets Authority has now come out with some guidance in terms of how you communicate on sustainability claims, including carbon emissions and things like that. So we need to make sure that we are communicating clearly and accurately, which is and if we're facing challenges, that is also communicated as well. So it's not just everything is great. There's challenges, and people need to know that there's challenges on that.
Thank you, Jose. And Richard, one of the points that you mentioned recurringly in your answers was the aspect of uncertainty and being able of dealing with uncertainty, and don't wait to be perfect, but just start doing something. How do you combine this with the need of communicating and addressing the data gaps limitation, communicate with stakeholder? How do you deal with uncertainty and the need that you can't wait to be perfect to communicate something, but you need to start somehow?
So I think, as Jose's emphasized a couple of times, it's finding your hotspots and taking action with the hotspots, because whether the number is exactly right or slightly off, if it's a hotspot, it'll still be a hotspot. So that's one way of dealing with the uncertainty. It's that kind of approach. there is, when you're communicating the overall number, that is a challenge, and we put out a number. We have an infographic which explains the hotspots visually to our customers. I think there is something when we're communicating externally about our scope 3 that the audience, or some audiences, don't understand the complexity of the calculations and the estimations that go behind producing a scope 3, both internally and externally. I mean, our model takes a few months to put together, and then to do it right, working with a third party, to really refine and sanitize and check the model, adds a bit more time. We're under pressure to produce it like 6 weeks after year end for publication of the annual report, and that's really hard, and we can't do that. Our stakeholders ask us why our scope 3 published data is for the previous year. Why isn't it contemporary? So there's an education piece to tell people, until the complexity of all the data and that is manageable, and there's platforms out there that can take data feeds with reliable data coming in, so you can produce these models much faster than we can these days. So there's a journey for us to improve the speed of turning around a scope 3 data set, plus the actions of our users of our information, that it's not an easy thing to put out there.
Yeah, sure.
But
sure.
Creating visuals is a great way to communicate, though. I mean, we've done a visual infographic of our footprint, because that's something people can put up, and
yeah,
the infographic ways where you have are great ways of explaining complex data sets quite simply, so you can drill into them where you want the detail but still get the high level picture. So there's plenty of graphic designers out there who can help, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good point and a very good suggestion. And talking about suggestion, 30 seconds from each of you before we move to the last 10 minutes of Q&A. If you have to just give one top tip for the audience about like one top tip about the hard work of measuring scope 3 emission, what would be your last remark in like the best tip you can give? Lerke?
Make sure that you have a well-documented methodology, be transparent, include all your stakeholders from the beginning, and then seek external support, but anchor it internally. You need to be able to have the ownership of your own emissions, also the scope 3 and the calculations. You cannot outsource it to consultants. You need to own it, but you need to seek external support, because this is not just a math exercise. It's a really complex exercise.
Thank you, Lerke. Richard, your 30 seconds, your top tip.
Absolutely build capability, but use the external help to validate the where you assign data. Is really complicated. It's very easy to get wrong, to put transport in the right bucket, to put energy in the right bucket, because if it all comes from spend data isn't organized the way a scope 3 data set would be organized. So yeah, the external support is invaluable, but echo Lerke's point, build the capability in yourself to pull the raw data sets together in a format that then the external help can either provide emission factors for you to use or help you put the emission factors in the right place.
Thank you, Richard. So from Lerke, from Richard, we heard things that are definitely complementary, like build your own skills internally, own your data, but also seek for external advice. Be sure about the data that you're using. Jose, what can you add on top of that?
Yeah, no, I would replicate the same comments, but on top of that, I would just say, like what I said before, just get to know your product well, and also get to if you can, as much visibility and transparency as you can into your supply chain. Get to know your partners, and really understand where everything is coming from if you can. There's surprises every corner, and you find that all of a sudden your hotspots are not exactly where you thought they were going to be. So knowing your supply chain is really, really important. But also knowing your product, I think, would be the other thing that I would on top of obviously what Larkin and Richard said, which I think is spot on. You need to build your capacity internally. You need to kind of build also the awareness internally with your decision makers. It needs to be embedded into business strategy. And when you think about growth, and when you think about expansion, and when you think about all this kind of other numbers that the market likes to see, that needs to kind of be attached to that. And yes, I obviously help from experts is important, because we're not we didn't go into this business to measure carbon emissions. We're selling clothes, or we're selling fashion, or we're selling from so yeah, once in a while we'll need to be humble and admit that we don't know everything, and we need to get some help.
Thank you very much. And I see that we have some very interesting questions coming from the audience. So just starting with some of them. We have a very interesting question asking that what about the purchasing team? So the question says, I assume that your purchasing team is responsible to collect data from suppliers. How did you go about training them and support the purchasing team to do so? Who wants to take this question?
Well, I can say that that's what you think. Well, at least, yeah. So our procurement teams have been incredible partners with us, but they've also gone through the journey as well. So they didn't start understanding, what data we were trying to capture, and we have had to kind of had long conversations, and again, a little bit of that feasibility study that we did with Carbon Trust. We did a look into some of those purchasing practices, and kind of how do we get the procurement teams involved. But yeah, there's different sources where data is coming from, so it's not just one single point, because again, data is quite complex. So, but yes, definitely, if you're going to start looking at who your critical partners are in this journey, you need to have your procurement team right next to you, or any buying team you have. They need to be right there, involved from the very beginning.
Yeah, Richard, you were also mentioning the importance of having a sort of toolkit for the department, right?
So to be honest, we started with assuming zero knowledge in the procurement team. So starting off by some basic educational sessions about what is a carbon emission, where does it fit into GSK sustainability ambition, etc. And we held capability sessions for the product procurement teams. And over the years, as the basic understanding of the language we're all talking about settled in, then you move to the next level of, well, looking at particular data and particular information. And then in terms of asking suppliers for product footprints, we've developed internal guidance to say, here's what we expect from a footprint, the best case, and then various layers down. Well, if you can't give us that, what about this? And if you can't give us that, what about this? And then we can assess that data ourselves in terms of some kind of quality attribute. So we will always prefer to use information from a supplier, but you can sort of color code it to the quality or the level of information that they're able to provide, with the best being a certified LCA or product footprint for the material or good that they're providing you. So it's just a continual journey. But at the beginning, we assumed no knowledge and built up from there, and it took time. It's not something you can just do overnight.
Yeah, thank you.
If I can add, we have dedicated colleagues in our procurement center of excellence working solely with sustainability in the supply chain. But without them, we wouldn't be able to, because they know the procurement team, they know the processes, they know everything revolving around what we need for Scope 3. So they of course are experts in their own field. But they make sure to educate all of our procurement managers. We have set training sessions, but we have dedicated colleagues in procurement because that's for us. It's the only way we make sure that we can integrate it across the business.
Thank you. And do you have a positive example of when you have been able to influence suppliers in reducing their emission? That's of course a very broad question. We couldn't spend like hours talking about that, but like if you have a flash answer, like one positive example in which you have been able to influence suppliers in reducing their emission, do you have something that comes to your mind immediately? Who want to start?
So I would say it's our Energize initiative, where we're seeing uptake of different suppliers feeding. This is a cross-sector initiative, so it's not a GSK alone, where we have common suppliers. We're seeing the formation of cohorts of suppliers grouping together to buy into power purchase agreements for renewable electricity. And they take a long time too to get over the line, but they're happening. There's cohorts in Europe and cohorts in America forming and getting over the line, and we're expanding that into India and Asia. And the sponsor group of companies involved in that program has grown from an initial 8 to I think there's now 15 or 16 companies who are informing their suppliers that this program is available. So that's it. It's a fantastic initiative.
Thank you. Lerke, anything you want to add, Lerke?
No, I can only say we've been influenced as a supplier because some of our customers are starting to set really strict requirements. But I can only advise to go into industry associations and work across, as Richard says, that it's also to make sure that we set the same requirements. As a supplier, if you face 50 different requirements from 50 different customers, we're not making it easier for anyone. So we're active in a pharmaceutical supply chain initiative to work across the industry on some of these issues.
Thank you. There are so many questions left. It's so difficult now to choose, but there's a question specifically addressed to Jose. It's like, how can you best deal with constant movement in tier 2 and 3 suppliers when calculating Scope 3?
Well, I don't know what they mean by constant movement. We have a pretty stable supply chain, so we've been working with some of our partners. We've been working for 20, 30 years. So and I think that more than anything, the challenge, I think, is moving through the tiers. Then your influence obviously changes, and your ability to then kind of generate changes, and that's where the need to collaborate kind of becomes stronger. So, for example, we are members of Cascale, which is an industry collaboration initiative that used to be called Sustainable Power Coalition, and through that there are standards that we can encourage our suppliers to adopt that have a clear framework for how do you look at your environmental indicators. There's other initiatives, for example, where we're also collaborating in terms of growing more responsible cotton or looking at recycled fibers and so on. But it is I think a combination of this is why I was saying, know your supply chain well. There's going to be different levels of maturity within your supply base as well. There's going to be suppliers that will need more support than others. In our industry, we have suppliers that are extremely advanced, and they already use renewable energy, and they're into, all this regenerative farming practices and things like that. So there are going to be different scenarios that you're going to find. So that's going back to my original point. Knowing your supply chain well is very, very important, so that you're going to understand where you need to prioritize and who are you bringing along in this journey with you.
Thank you. So we are at time. Thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you very much to the audience who sent us questions. And if those who haven't been answered, you want to forward them to us, we can then be in touch with our panelists and have answers also afterwards. We will follow up with you with the recording. Thank you for your attention. And I think that the key learnings that we can take from this now, it's really the key words that we have been hearing the most during this panel has been really the urge to act, the capacity to deal with uncertainty and combine it with the urge to act. So don't wait to be perfect, but start to do something. And the importance of seeking the proper support, but also owning then the key learnings and the path and the journey, because actually that's really something that involves us all. And as Lerke said at the beginning of the panel, it's important that the private industry and private companies really step forward and then set the example. So thank you again to everyone. It has been a pleasure. I hope you enjoyed it, and let's just stay in touch in the future for any further question you should have on your sustainability journey. Bye. Have a nice rest of the day.